Last month, it was reported that actor Dwain Murphy has been cast as Larry Trainor, aka Negative Man, a member of the Doom Patrol, who will show up as a recurring character in the live-action Titans TV show that's going to be on DC's digital-only service later this year. Now, his casting makes the original Doom Patrol complete. They've already cast everybody else for the show. The first person was they cast the Chief, who's the Doom Patrol's leader and creator. Then they cast Elasti-Girl, and then it was Robotman. And now with Negative Man being cast, all 4 original members are complete from the 60s comics when the Doom Patrol started. There's one more adult member who joined the team later on in the 60s, Minto, whose real name is Steve Dayton. We'll see if they cast him. I don't know if they have yet, but the original 4 people, all the first 4 are cast now with Dwain Murphy as Negative Man. But who is Negative Man exactly? I will explain. Negative Man debuted in the 1960s comics, Larry Trainor. He was a test pilot in the military who was flying like an experimental plane in Earth's atmosphere, and he broke Earth's atmosphere and went into a radioactive zone. And at first it was an accident. I don't know if it was part of the experiment or if something went wrong and he wasn't supposed to go in that area. His guidance systems failed. But later on, it was in a retcon, it was discovered that the Chief, the Doom Patrol's leader, had caused the guidance system to fail to make it look like an accident, to give Larry powers on purpose. But originally that wasn't what it was. It was actually an accident. Later, writers and editors decided to change continuity to make it that way, but at first it was really an accident. He was in some radioactive zone, and he was bathed in radioactive energy, and when he came back to Earth, he discovered he had the ability to project a radioactive version being of himself outward, out of his body, and it could fly really fast at super speed, pass through walls, shoot blasts out of the hands, energy blasts. It was basically an energy being that could do what he would tell it to do. And at first it didn't seem to have a mind of its own. But later on in later Doom Patrol stories, this negative being did seem to think in a rudimentary way or would never say anything. But it would always do what Larry told it to do, I think most of the time. But, when Larry would send it out of his body, he would be weakened. His physical form would be weak and he couldn't do anything and he'd be helpless while his energy being was out doing things. And he could only have his energy being out of his body for 60 seconds max. If the being was out of his body any longer than that, Larry would risk dying because it was just too much stress on him to keep this being out that long. It had to come back to his body eventually, sooner rather than later. Larry always was bathed in radioactive energy, whether or not his negative being energy self was out or not. So he had to be wrapped in special bandages to keep, the energy from infecting people around him. So his powers were a curse. He got superpowers, but they also, messed up his way of life, like they did for all the original members of the Doom Patrol. That's why the Doom Patrol, they thought of themselves as freaks, because their superpowers also kind of destroyed their lives as they knew it. Now, Larry as Negative Man was a member of the original Doom Patrol throughout its entire run, until they all seemed to be killed off in the last issue of the original Doom Patrol series in an explosion. They were blown up by Doom Patrol enemies, Madame Rouge and General Zol. And that was the end it seemed, of Larry and the Doom Patrol for a while, until DC brought them back. In a later Doom Patrol series, it was revealed that Larry had survived the explosion. They didn't explain why, though, or how, he survived. He was just alive. But he was in a coma, and the negative being had left his body. He was in a coma and found a new host. And it was a Russian government agent named Valentina Vostok. And she became Negative Woman. Now, when Larry awakened from the coma and discovered that his being had left him, he was back to normal, but he did miss having the power, and he was, jealous and angry and wanted his powers back. And so he decided to go to nefarious means to get the negative being back into him, whether Valentina liked it or not. He broke a radioactive supervillain named Reactron, out of prison and used Reactron. I think he bribed him with money or something, paid him off to force him to use his abilities to forcefully drain the negative energy out of Valentina Vostok's body and, contain it into a device. And then, and then Larry, came and got it out of the device and put it back in his own body and became Negative Man again. And this didn't make Valentina happy at all. But anyways, as Negative Man, again, Larry became an active member of the Doom Patrol briefly until they went into outer space on a mission against this like alien, despot named Gargwax. And Larry had to, with the negative being, fly it out of his body to disable some nuclear bombs that Gargwax had sent flying towards Earth. And I think something went wrong and the bombs exploded in space, and the energy and the explosion, I guess it forced or disrupted the negative being's connection to Larry, and it left Larry and went back into Valentina, who was in a coma at the time or who was sick. And then Larry discovers he's back to normal again, and the being has left him. He doesn't want it to. It's back in Valentina. Valentina is livid with him because she discovers what he did. She beats him up and all this kind of stuff, and, they have friction. But then he's a regular guy again because he doesn't have the negative energy anymore. And, he just becomes a human helper of the Doom Patrol, and she becomes a negative woman again. But later on, the being chooses, when she's in a fight, she's hurt, the negative being leaves her and decides on its own to go back to Larry Trainor in the new series of the Doom Patrol when Grant Morrison took over writing it. And he made Negative Man and Larry really weird. When Negative Man went back to Larry to join him, it merged Larry's body forcefully with the lady who was treating him, a doctor named Eleanor Poole, I forgot. And the three of them became like one being named Rebus. And, Rebus had both male and female, like, physical features because he was part man, part woman. It was really weird. And a lot of other weird stuff happened where Rebus would mate with itself and reproduce. It was strange. But anyways, that's kind of where Negative Man, or the energy, was at that point in time. And then later on, DC, as it likes to reboot and relaunch, started the Doom Patrol again from scratch with writer-artist John Byrne. And I don't remember what the new origin was, but people hated this new Doom Patrol, so I think DC has pretended like it never happened, and, they just ignore it. But the way that Negative Man was drawn and the negative energy, I thought that was cool. He was like some kind of glowing skeleton. I thought that was a cool, visually artistic way to do Negative Man, but it didn't last, because that's the only time, you ever see Negative Man drawn that way. But I thought it was cool. Later on, because DC likes to relaunch and reboot a lot, they restored, the original Doom Patrol continuity in a relaunch, ignored the John Byrne stuff, and everything was back to the way it was. But in in this version of the Doom Patrol, one of the later ones, it was discovered that in the explosion that everyone thought in the 60s had killed the original Doom Patrol, including Larry, his physical body was destroyed at that time. It was blown up. But the negative energy that survived after that was actually his consciousness, his mind, body, and spirit. And when it didn't have Larry's body to go back to, that's why it decided to go into Valentina Vostok, because it missed Larry. And the chief cloned a new body of Larry to, exist. And so that guy who, hired Reactron and all that stuff to steal and do all that stuff, that was actually a clone of the original Larry's body and not the original Larry. I know it's confusing, huh? But that was, an interesting, modification, I guess, to the origin. In the current version of the Doom Patrol series, written by Gerard Way, Larry somehow gets mysteriously separated from the negative being. I don't think they ever explain how, but we discovered that the original negative being that, embodied his physical form way back in the 60s was actually a being from this, like, dimension of negative beings called negative space. And when the two of them are separated, he wants to come back to Larry, but the whole race of beings that this entity belongs to transport both of them back to their, home planet or home dimension and put Larry on trial for being separated from the being. And they basically sentence him to being connected to the being forever, which makes no sense, but that was their conclusion. But Larry decides, he wants this to happen. He misses the negative being. He wants it back into him because he wants to be able to help people with the negative being, which is what it allowed him to do. And so they say, okay, if that's how you want it, it's your choice. We bond the two of you together forever. And he becomes Negative Man once again, and now he's a member of the Doom Patrol, the current Doom Patrol, as Negative Man. Now, I hope I was able to explain all that to you clearly. I know comic books can be very confusing and convoluted. You have decades of history and soap opera kind of stuff, and it's difficult to condense all of that sometimes into one video and to make it all make sense. But I hope I was able to at least give you a little bit more information about who Negative Man is. I've made some other videos too telling you about the Doom Patrol's connection to Beast Boy and the Teen Titans, which is why they're going to be in the Titans TV show in the first place. I didn't talk about it in this video because I made other videos about that. And I'll put a card linking to it in the description. But thank you for watching. I appreciate your viewership. If you like this video, please like it on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel because I like doing these videos for you. And I'll definitely be making more videos about the Titans TV show and DC TV and movies in general because I like this stuff. And I will talk to you soon. Bye.